Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Simon, and in this video I'm going to cover the Unix Administration Practice Test number 2. And this practice test is the exact same practice test that I was given when I took this course last winter. So the good news is, if you are struggling with this and there's any parts of this that doesn't make sense to you, I'm going to go over the entire practice test. I'm going to show you how it's done, and hopefully if you are struggling with anything, I'm going to be able to clarify all of that for you. And just like the first video that I created for your first test, I'm going to give you some pointers and some suggestions on what you need to study and how you can efficiently study for this test coming up, so you know what to focus on and things you don't need to focus on. So I'll do that first, and then I'll go over this practice test. But like I say in all my videos, if you have any questions or you're concerned about anything, let me know and I'd be happy to help. Okay, so let's just go through this. The very first thing I'll tell you is that when it comes to this test, you're going to want to study the last 6 labs. So that's NFS, routing, DNS, backup and recovery, logging, and performance. Installing CentOS 7 was a bonus lab, so you don't have to worry about that. You're not going to be focused on that at all. It's just these 6 labs right here. Students will say to me, okay, but do I need to know anything from the first 6 labs that was on test 1? You do need to know stuff from the 6 labs previously, but I will tell you that anything that you need to know, for example, how to install a service, how to add a user, how to start or restart a service or utility, they tell you how to do it in these practice labs, so you really don't need to go into any of these at all, in my opinion. I mean, feel free to go through them if you need to, but I don't think that you need to. Just go through the practice labs and the grade labs of these guys, and you should be good to go. Now, you're also probably going to say, well, I looked at the practice test, and I noticed that there's only 3 of the 6 labs on there. There's only backup and recovery, NFS, and logging. But there isn't anything on the practice test that shows anything to do with routing, DNS, or performance. Does that mean it's not on the test? I don't know. I have no idea if it's not on the test, but this is what I can tell you. Here's the logic behind why it's not in your practice test and why it probably isn't on your test. Although I can't say it isn't, and you should definitely study as if it is. The reason why they are probably not on your test and why it isn't on your practice test is this. With routing, if you mess up routing, that could mean that you won't be able to send the grading script to the right virtual machine, which means that you can't run it, which means all the things that you did right, you're not going to get a mark for, and you won't be able to submit it back and upload it. So that means that you'll get a 0 on the test if you don't do routing right. So even though you might have done everything else right, if you don't do routing right, you get nothing, and that's not really fair. So I can't see them putting that on there. Same thing with DNS. If you forget to put one character in one of the configuration files for the DNS system, you could actually prevent W01 from having access to the internet, which means you can't even download the grading script, which means you get a 0, which is not fair if you did everything else right. So when it comes to routing and DNS, they should really have their own test, in my opinion. But I think because the teachers know that, they're most likely not going to put it on your test. But I can't be sure of that. I do believe one of the students told me they did see it on one of their tests. So you won't know for sure. You just have to assume it's on there and practice it. But if they don't, that would be the logic, is that they could actually prevent you from actually running the grading script, and that's not going to end up being fair if you did everything else fine. And when it comes to performance you could do, but a lot of times you'll see in that performance lab, it requires you to kind of stress your virtual machine system. And if you stress it too much, it could crash. And if it crashes, that means you could lose all of your data and all the progress that you made, which means you would probably get a 0 because you wouldn't be able to boot it back up in time and finish it. And they don't want to take the risk of that. So performance, routing, and DNS are really tricky to put on a test, but it may be on there. Just like I said, the reason why it's not on your practice test is my guess. It's just too tricky of a lab, and it could mess up everything. And yeah, that's how I see it. So study for it as if it's on there, but don't be surprised if it's not. Now, here's the other part. Just like I said in the first test video, when it comes to studying, you're definitely going to want to make sure you know how to do this practice test. Like, you want to know how to do it really well. You want to be able to understand what you're doing, and if you can do that, you'll probably get a good 80% on your actual final test. So that is the first thing that you should be studying is your practice test. But you really do need to make sure that you go through the practice labs on all of these labs because they're going to help you. And if anything, it's going to help you know where to look for the information if you don't know how to do it off the top of your head. One of the things I always say to students is don't memorize any of the commands, just know where to find the commands. So when you see, for example, on here, it says, hey, we're going to do NFS, and you need to make sure that any user on W01 must appear as Alice on the share. You need to know where to find that. You don't need to memorize how to do it, just know where to find it. And obviously you're going to go to the practice lab for NFS and you're going to try to find the answer in here somewhere. But if you know where to find it because you've done the practice lab so many times, it'll make things easier. It makes things quicker for you. You know where to look, and then you can do this practice, or you can do the actual test and the practice test with no problems. So when it comes down to priority, first priority, make sure you understand how to do the practice test with no problems. Second, make sure you know how to do the practice labs and make sure you go through them to the point where you know where to find the information you're looking for if you need to look for it. And the final thing is, if you have time, try to do the grade labs just to challenge yourself, because as you saw with the first test, just because it's not on the practice test doesn't mean it's not going to show up on your actual test. There's always a couple tricky things that they throw in there that they weren't throwing in the actual practice test. So be prepared for anything. But typically what they're going to challenge you with isn't something that hasn't been put into either the practice labs or the grade labs. So you're not going to see, I don't think you'll see anything coming out of left field, but you might see something that isn't on the practice test show up on your test. So just be prepared for that. Like I said, study practice test, then practice labs, then the grade labs if you have time. With that being said, I think that that's everything. I think we can finally go into the actual practice test and go figure everything out. So let's do that. Let's go into the VirtualBox Manager and let's delete any previous virtual machines we have for the Unix administration course. I had 2, so I'm just going to right click, remove, delete all files. Click on File, Import Appliance, and find the OVA file. You will also need to have the DVD ISO image because you're going to be installing software. So make sure you have the OVA and the DVD ISO image and hit Next. And use these settings for the test, because if they do put performance on there, if you put the wrong settings, it could actually mess things up. If you give yourself a lot more RAM than you're used to and they try to give you a test on performance and they're assuming that you have only 1 CPU instead of 2, or they're assuming you have 1024 megabits of RAM instead of more, that could impact everything. So just use these settings. It's the only time I'm going to tell you, definitely use these settings. Click import and wait for it to import. Like I said, make sure you have that DVD ISO image ready to go as well. So that's all you had to do for part A. We're going to start with part B. Now here's a huge tip for you. In this case, we don't have to do what I'm about to tell you, but what you need to do is read the whole test before you do it. Have a game plan, because look at this. It says Part B backup. Today you'll be changing many files in the etc directory tree, so you'll first create a backup of etc on SO1. So it says just create a tar archive named temp etc.tar on SO1 containing all the files from the local etc directory tree. That seems easy enough. You're just creating a tar archive. That's it. But if you scroll down, you're going to see Part E, incremental backup. Now in this case, it says that we're going to basically make a CPIO archive with all new files from that were created after we did this. Okay, so I'm going to show you, you don't really need, in this case you didn't need to look ahead, but on your test, remember there is this backup and recovery section called incremental backup, and you might actually prefer doing this whole thing up here, so that way if your Part E ends up saying instead of a level 0 you want to do a level 1 tar archive now, then you're going to be like, okay, well I planned for this ahead of time, I did this guy first, now all I have to do is run this guy after. And that was one of the things I found on my test, is the test had me do something in the beginning and I just didn't read ahead, and because I didn't read ahead, when I finally got to this section I was like, oh, I should have done it in a different way. And because I didn't do it a different way, and because I had all these changes, I had to do the whole test over again, which gave me 30 minutes left where I could do everything. And thankfully I did it. But if you're not a quick typer, this could actually be detrimental to your whole test and your grade. So make sure you read the test in advance so you know what they're going to get you to do, because especially with backup and recovery, incremental backup could technically end up referring to this guy here, and they might actually say make a level 0 and a level 1 tar having all new files. So just be prepared for that. In this case, we don't need to, and I'll show you that later. But that's one thing that I think from my test, that was the part that I was like, oh man, I should have done it a different way. If I read ahead, I would have known, I would have had a better plan, and then I wouldn't have been stressing for half an hour to do everything properly. So once your virtual machines are ready, by the way, just start them up. And I hope that made sense. I like I said, I know I'm talking about things that might be confusing to you, but it's always good to read everything first and then do it, because you might find that, like I said, this guy right here seems easy enough, but it could be completely different in terms of what you wanted to do once you get down here. So that's all. So let's bring this guy over here. Let's bring this one down here. Go ahead and log into both, because you're going to need both. There we go. All right, so now I have the terminals open in W01 and SO1's ready to go. Let's start with part B, and I've already read this to you, so all we're going to do is create a tar archive named temp etc.tar on SO1 containing all the files from the local etc directory tree. So if you get your backup and recovery practice lab, it's easy enough. You're just going to scroll up till you see the tar command, and you're going to see create a backup of the books directory. So it tells you how to do it, but instead of books, we're using the etc directory. So we're going to say tar cf, and cf means create a file from the files in this directory. So we're going to create this file of the files in this directory, which means in this case we are going to say tar cf, and then we're going to say temp etc.tar, because that's the file we're creating, that's the archive we're creating, and we want to do it from the etc directory. Okay, so it's going to look like this, and you're going to hit enter, and that's it. You're all done. If we say ls temp, we can see we now have the etc.tar directory, which is perfect. That's all we needed, and now we're done part B. So that was really, really quick. It took more time for me to say it than actually do it. So now we're doing part C, NFS. In this section, you'll create an NFS share on SO1 to be used by any and all users on W01. So this is a tricky one because we have several restrictions or requirements. The first says the shared directory must be called shared W01. Okay, it doesn't really tell you if it's supposed to be like that on W1 and SO1, but I'm going to assume it's supposed to be the same on both, okay? Then it says any user on W1 must appear as Alice on the share. Okay, so that's really important to know, because with Alice, it has to show up. Remember that if you're going to use it, you have to make sure Alice is on both machines and they have the same UID and GUID. So that's really important. So we're going to have to create Alice on SO1 because Alice doesn't exist yet. Then it says all configuration changes must survive a reboot. So we're going to want to make sure we have that check config, the service name, on, so we make sure that every time the system boots up, it's active. The share must be mounted by W1 when you run the grain script. So you have to make sure that it's mounted. It's ready to go when you run that grain script, otherwise you're not going to get the points. And then the share must contain at least one test file created by a user on W1. It doesn't matter what the test file is, it doesn't matter who it's by, but as long as you put it in there, let's say by root, then it has access to it. But just remember that that file is going to end up appearing as Alice on the share. So I'm going to show you how to do that as well. But all these things here can be easily found in NFS. So first thing we have to do is we have to install NFS utils on both systems. So what we're going to do is go to SO1 and make sure we get that DVD ISO image mounted. So here it is. If you don't know where it is, just make sure you go choose disk image and find it. And I have it right here. Once you have it, say cd dev, not cd, sorry, mount dev cd-rom. There we go. I can see it's loaded there. So all you have to say is yum install nfs utils, and we say yes, and we're good to go there. So let's go back to W01 and do the same thing. Now this one's going to mount automatically, so I don't really have to do anything in terms of mounting it, but we're still going to say yum install nfs utils, and oh, I have to be root, so I apologize. There we go. So yum install nfs utils, and we just have to wait. This one takes a little bit longer. I think it's actually looking at the internet first before it looks at the DVD ISO image. And we'll say yes, and there we go. So we can clear that. We have NFS utils on both machines, which is perfect. So now what we need to do is we need to make that share folder. So let's go back here for a second. It says the shared directory must be called share W01. So what we're going to do is this. We're going to say make drive -p share W01. Make sure it's the right name, otherwise it might not show up on the grading script, which would suck. Alright, so now that we have that, it says any user on W1 must appear as Alice on the share. So let's make Alice first. So what we're going to do is say user add, and we're going to say Alice M, and say U. We're going to make a unit of 500. Okay. Now you might say why, and I'll show you why. If I say cat etc password, we can see that Alice on W1 has the unit, the UID, which is her user ID of 500, and her GID or GUID, the group name of 500 as well. So that's Alice Alice. So Alice is the group, Alice here is the user. So we have to make sure that that's the same on SO1 as well. So if I now say cat etc password, we can see my Alice now has 500, 500. So that's exactly what we want, because that way they're synced up. So make sure you have them synced up, otherwise you're going to have a lot of problems. And again, I learned this all in here, just so you know. I'm not sure. Here we go. That's basically what I did right there. Is just made sure Alice was on there. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that it's in our exports file. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to say vi etc exports, and there's nothing in there, but that's okay, because what we're going to do is we're going to say share W01 space, and we're going to say W01, because we want to make sure that this is basically what we're doing right here. Okay, and they have to be able to read and write. So make sure there's no space between W1 and this bracket and what we're going to put in there, but make sure there's a space between the actual directory and the computer that's going to have use of it. So we're going to say read write. Okay, then what we're going to do is we're going to say squash all. Actually, I think it's all squash. Let me just make sure. All squash. Yes, sorry, I apologize. It's all squash. Okay, but now remember, the actual practice test says that we have to make sure every user appears as Alice. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. When we say all squash, that means squash every user's privileges to make it one user. So everyone's going to share the one user's privileges. So that's what all squash does. So we're going to say W1 is going to have read write. All squash meaning it doesn't matter if you're root, doesn't matter if you're, you know, someone else. It's all going to be squashed, and we're going to use one user's account. And what we're going to do is say a non-UID equals, and in quotes, 500, which is Alice. Okay, and we will put that in brackets, and that's all you have to do. Now you're going to just basically save this, and that is going to allow us to make sure that this share folder is accessible by W1 and all users. Everyone has read write, but all users are going to have their permissions and their title squashed, and it's going to all be considered Alice. That's what we're doing. So we're going to save this. Okay. And now what we're going to do is just reboot the machine. So remember, all configuration changes must survive a reboot. So first thing I'm going to do is say check config NFS on. Okay. Now you might say, how do I know it's NFS and not NFS utils? Just remember, you can say check config list. You'll have the list of all the services, and NFS is what it was called. So that's why I said NFS on. Once again, if you go in here, you'll actually see that somewhere. Let's see, right here. There we go. And it says that you need to shut down. You can just restart the service, but let's just play it safe. Let's say shutdown R now. And what we're going to do is we're going to check to make sure that it was done properly. Once it loads back up, perfect. So we're going to say export FS V, and there we go. This is perfect. We can see share W1 is accessible by W1. We have read write. Don't worry about this stuff. It gets auto-populated. But we have the all squash, which is perfect. Even though it says root squash, we have all squash, which is what we want. And then a non-UID equals 500. So all that looks perfect. That's exactly what we want. The only thing that we want to make sure is that we change that folder's permissions. Because remember, we haven't done that yet. So let's make sure we say chown Alice, and we're going to say share W01. Okay, that's changing the ownership to Alice. I don't believe it tells us to do it, but let's just do it anyway, just in case. And then chmod 777 share W01. That way, anyone has the ability to read and write into that folder. Because even though we put it in here that everyone has the ability to read and write, you'll want to make sure you put this in as well, just in case. In fact, I'm actually going to take it one step further. I'm going to say 2777 share W01. There we go. That way, the group Alice also owns it as well. So that is what I would do. Up to you. You don't necessarily have to do 2777, I don't believe, because it doesn't necessarily specify that, but it might specify it on your actual test, so you never know. But that's what I would do. Make sure this permission is in there, so that way anyone can read and write into this folder now. So let me just kind of go over what we did again. We installed the NFS utility services. We went into the export file. We said we're going to export share.w1, which is a folder we created, and we said that w1 is going to have access to read and write. We're going to squash everything, so all the users' permissions are going to be used having Alice's permissions only, and Alice is going to own all the files. And then we just changed the directory's ownership, and we changed the permission of the directory so that everything is owned by Alice and comes out as Alice. And so then we restarted the services. Everything was good to go. Once again, if you want, you can say service NFS restart. There we go. It's all good to go. And now what we get to do is we get to play with W01. So with W01, all we have to do is this. First, we're already root, so that's good. So let's just create a directory. Make directory, and I'm going to call it the exact same thing. Share W01. All right. So now that we have share W01, this is what we're going to do. Let's go back into NFS, and you're going to see that there's going to be one section where we have to create a FS tab entry. Okay, so this is where I'm getting this from. We're going to say vi etc fs tab, or FS tab. Go down to the end, and we're going to say so1 share w01, and that is going to be linked to share w1 on the w1 side. So so1 means on so1 we're going to be transferring all these files to this folder on so1, and we're going to be able to access it through this directory on w01. go here, we'll say NFS. We can leave this as defaults, and then we can leave this as 0, 0. There we go. And now you're going to want to mount it. You can mount the folder like this, or you can just like mount -A for all. And if you want to just make sure it's there, just say df, and we can see that it's there. And my suggestion is give it a couple minutes, because I know that you don't have a lot of time on your test, but when you do this, you're going to find that when you decide to create a file, it just freezes. And sometimes you have to cancel it and then do it again. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. Sometimes it works right away, sometimes it doesn't. But I'm just going to say touch share w01 Simon is awesome.txt, and I'm going to hit enter, and that just worked. So that works. That's perfect. So that I took some time to do. I didn't do it right away, but that's why, just so you know, is that sometimes it can take a long time. So if you say touch and you hit this and it seems to stop and it just lingers there for a couple of minutes, give it a couple of minutes, but if it's still stuck there, just cancel it and then try it again. The reality is, if it's stuck there and it doesn't give you a permission denied, it just means it's just waiting for it to properly do its thing. So if it gets stuck there, don't worry about it. If worse comes to worse, just hit Control C to cancel, and then you can try it again, and it should work. So now that I'm in SO1, I'm just going to make sure that the file is there. So if I say lsl share w01, we can see Simon is awesome is right there. So I think he wants us to have something in the file. So if you want, you can say like echo, Simon is awesome, the sequel. You can put that into share w01 Simon is awesome. There you go. Now here's the trick though. I don't know if you noticed it. Even though it's in here, look who owns it. Alice. See that? So Alice and Alice were the owners, the user Alice and the group Alice. That's what you want to see. So even though I was root, it still shows up as Alice. So that's all you need to know. If you did that correctly. Let's go to the practice test. The share we created, all users are Alice. All configuration changes must survive a reboot, which we did with the check config. The share must be mounted by W1 when you run the grading script, so it is mounted right now. If you restart W1, make sure you restart or you mount that folder again. And then it says the share must contain at least one test file created by a user, and we have that. So we've just completed all of this, and that wasn't too hard. It wasn't too hard. I know that I went through it pretty quickly, but everything that I did, I got through this folder or this practice lab. So just go over it, make sure you understand it. The biggest thing that is probably the hardest thing for people to understand is the no root squash, and all root squash. And I'll tell you what it is really basic right now. Basically, the idea is the root of W1 will have access to SO1 when you have a share folder. So you have to determine if this is root, do they have the same privileges as root on SO1? Does W1's root have the same privilege as SO1? And if you want them to, then you can basically say no root squash, which means don't squash this root's privileges. Don't terminate it, don't stop its privileges, don't cut its privileges at all. Let it be its thing. So if you say no root squash, think of squashing as like stopping or preventing. So no root squash means do not squash or do not prevent root from being root. And if you say root squash means don't let this root have the same privileges as the root of SO1. So this root guy is going to have basic privileges, not all the same privileges as SO1. So that's what root squash means. When you say all squash, that means squash everyone's privileges. It doesn't matter who they are, squash them all so that they end up having the same privileges as whoever the user is. In this case, we said Alice. So I hope that makes sense, but on your test, you will definitely probably have to decide which squash you're going to use. Root squash, which means you're squashing the permissions of W1. No root squash, which means you're not squashing permissions. They'll have the exact same permissions as root of SO1. Or all squash, which means everyone gets squashed to the same user's privileges, which is could probably be Alice, maybe someone else, but my guess is someone like Alice. So good job, you just finished part C, so we're almost done. Now we have part D, logging. It says install the Apache web server on SO1 and have it log its errors via our syslog to the file var log httpd.error. All changes must survive permanent. All changes must be permanent. They must survive a reboot. You must cause the web server to generate some errors to test your work. So it just says some. So just do a couple. You don't have to do tons. But let's do that. So very first thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure that SO1 has the HTTPD server, which is Apache. So let's just go in here and make sure it's there. It is. I'm just going to clear this, say df. And I don't see that it's mounted yet, so I'm going to mount it. Okay, so now I can see that this guy is mounted, so that means I can say yum install httpd. Yes. And that's installed now, so that's perfect. So here we go. So we're going to clear this. So what we're going to do is let's first go into the HTTPD configuration file. And this is something that you're going to learn in logging. So it tells you everything that you need to do here. Basically, you're going to go into this file, but you have to find it first. And I'm going to show you how to find it. And then you're going to do rsyslog with a facility. You can do local 2, you can do local 3, but whatever local you're going to do, just make it sure it's consistent. So I'm just going to do local 2 because it's here. But let's find this file first. So I know that the file is this. I know where that is, but it doesn't tell you in any of these labs, so you have to find it yourself. So just know how to find it. The way that you're going to find it is this. You're going to say find wherever you are, and you're going to look in the entire computer for something named httpd.conf. You wait a couple seconds, but it finally tells you. So that's where you're going to be editing this file. And what we want to edit in this file is where all the logs or where all the messages and errors are going to go. So we're going to say vi etc httpd conf and then httpd.conf, enter, and you're going to have this massive file, and you're going to go closer to the bottom, not exactly the bottom, but you're going to look for something that says error log. So I know it's close to the bottom, so I'm just going to skim all of this, but eventually I'm going to start slowing it down because we need to find this little error. Alright, so let's go here. And if you've done the logging practice lab or grade lab, you'll know what to look for, but you're looking for that right here. So I don't know if you can see that, but it says error log. Okay, so all we're going to do is we're just going to delete it, say syslog. Even though it's our syslog, just remember for this we're going to call it syslog colon local 2, and that's all you have to do. You're just going to keep the error log, but make sure it says syslog colon local 2 instead, and then save it. And then you can start up the service. So service httpd start. There we go. So it's all started, and you want to make sure that it starts. So go into W01, go httpd so1, and there we go. So that started. That's perfect. That's all we needed for now. If we go back here, though, it says that we have to make sure that it's logging its errors to var log httpd.err. So let's do that. So we're going to say vi etc rsyslog.conf. Okay, and we're going to do a couple things. First thing that we're going to do is this. We're going to let the UDP and TCP files be received on SO1, because remember, we're on W01, and when we go here and we log these files have to go to SO1. So we have to make sure we are able to receive them, which means the UDP and TCP sections, these guys down here, have to be enabled. These these number signs are comments, which means right now they're commented out, so that means I can't accept any other messages from a different machine. We don't want that. We want to make sure that you can. So we're going to hit insert and leave the first line here because it's just a comment. But the second and third line, we're going to uncomment it. So just erase the number sign, and that's what it should look like. Same thing for the second part right here for TCP. Leave the first line, but the second and third line, just get rid of the number sign or the pound sign. Perfect. So we've done that now, but now what we have to do is we have to create a folder or a file that basically logs all of these errors. So we're going to just go down here to something that says rules, which is right here. And just in the rules section, just add, a section for ourselves. So I'll put it at the very end just in case. So this is the very end. We're just going to add a new line. And it doesn't matter, you don't have to put a comment, but you can if you want. But you're going to say local2 dot, and it says anything, right? So it says install so that it logs its errors via our syslog. It doesn't specify it's got to be errors, so I'm just going to say anything. So local2 and dot star or asterisk, that means any priority that has the facility of local2 is going to be sent to wherever we want to go. And in this case, we want to go to var log httpd dot error. Okay. If you did make errors and up or errors and higher, then I would have said local2.err. But because it's not emphasized, I'm just going to assume he needs the star. If you want, check with your teacher just to make sure, but I think that this is what he's looking for. So once you've done this, you can basically save it. And once again, just so you know, logging, I'm getting all of this from basically here. It kind of teaches us how to do it. Look at my video on how to do this so you understand this a little bit better. But that's all you had to do for this guy. So now, like I say all the time, make sure you service our syslog, restart this baby. There we go. So now we're done here. But it's not going to send us the log files when we go here and we mess things up, because we have to make sure that W1 knows it's going to be sending all of these errors to SO1. So even though SO1's prepared, W1 is not yet. So let's go back in here. We're still root, so that's perfect. What we're going to do is say vi etc rsyslog.conf. We don't have to do anything with UDP or TCP because this is just for reception. We don't want to receive anything. We want to send stuff. So we don't have to worry about that. How we're going to send it is this. We're going to go down here. We're in rules now. Same thing. Let's just go to the bottom just to make it easy for us. Hit insert. We're going to say local2.star. Same thing that we did on the previous one. But instead of var log and then httpd.error or .err, we're going to say at SO1 colon 514. So 2 ats, if you remember, mean that you're sending it via TCP, which is what we want. SO1 is the machine we're going to be sending these to, and then we're using port 514, or we're using the protocol for TCP, so we're going to be putting 514. So you're going to want to memorize that. So now that you've done that, you can hit escape. You can hit WQ, save it and quit. And once again, let's just restart the service. So our syslog restart. There we go. So it says all changes must be permanent, so they have to survive a reboot. So once again, we just want to make sure that that the HTTPD is going to survive a reboot. So we're going to say check config HTTPD on. And that way we know that it is good. If you don't know how to do this, if you have to remember, just remember when you say check config list, you're going to look at your list. We have NFS, and it says off, off, on, off. That's what you want. You want 2 offs, then you want 4 ons, and 1 final off. So let's go to HTTPD right up here. Same thing, off, off, on, off. So now we know it's going to survive a reboot. And you must cause the web server to generate some errors to test your work. So let's just clear this. Let's cause some errors. So we're going to say / Simon is awesome. It says nothing. Okay. And then let's try it again. the SQL. Nothing. Okay, cool. So now let's see if it actually went into that file. Remember, we created a log file for this just recently in our syslog. It generated it on W1, but W1 said if you get it, send it to SO1, and it went to SO1, and now it basically put it into where SO1 wanted it to go. So what we're going to do is we're just going to say cat var log, and then remember it was in this file right here, httpd.err. Hit enter, and look at that. Simon is awesome, and Simon is awesome the SQL. It's in there, so we are finally done part D, logging. So that's all you had to do for logging. I know that I went through it pretty quickly. I have a video for logging, so look at that. If you have any questions, let me know. But what I did is exactly what you need to do, and you're good to go. And he only needed a couple errors, so you don't have to go crazy, but if you wanted, you could. You know, the second SQL. And now I can just do this, and there we go. See, pretty easy, not too hard. Just make sure you understand why I'm doing what I'm doing, and you should be good. So now we have part E, incremental backup. And it says you made some changes that to the contents of etc directory tree on SO1 since the backup was created in section B. Create a CPIO archive named temp etc.cpio containing only the files that have changed since the tar backup from section B completed. Hint, man, find, look for something about newer files. So if you want, you can do this. You can say yum install man. That way you can say man find, and you can look for something that says a newer. So we'll look. Where is it? It is. Sorry. Yeah, a newer file. File was last accessed more recently than file was modified. So you can look at these and try to find which one you're looking for, and it says something about newer files. There's a C newer, file status was last changed more recently than file was modified, but you're looking for one of these. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quit. Let's just clear. And let's do that. So we're going to say, and once again, if you want the CPIO stuff, just go back into backup and recovery, find the CPIO section right here, and it tells you what you need to do. So you're basically going to be like, okay, I'm going to go into the folder I need to, and then you're going to find, but this time we're going to find something that's newer, and then we're going to CPIO that there. So let's do that. So let's go here, and we're going to say CD, and we put that in temp, I believe. Okay, and then find dot, and then we're going to say a newer, and then we're going to say, I think it was called etc tar. Perfect. So it's going to give us everything. And if you want to check just to make sure, just hit this, and you're going to see that, right? If I say C newer, because that was also an option, you can see that. It's the same thing, it looks like. So we're like, okay, cool. So we're going to say a newer, and we can see that it added a bunch of stuff. And we're going to say, okay, that's good. We're going to say, we're going to pipe it over, and CPIO, and then we're going to say O, and I believe that's, we're going to, let's just go back here really quickly. OV. Okay, and then we're going to put that into temp, and then etc.cpio. And that's it. There we go. So it just created that for us. So now, if I say ls-l temp, we can see that we have etc.cpio and etc.tar, and the CPIO only has the new stuff that's there. And that's all you had to do for this guy. And then you're done. So again, once I said this earlier, basically when it comes to incremental backup, I would not be surprised if you should be actually using this stuff here, because this was such a important aspect to it, and it's really, really useful. So when you're looking at your test, make sure you study this part, because when you're doing it, I might say for part B, when it says create a tar archive, it might be a level 0 tar archive. So it might be you running this guy, and then the final part of your test, the incremental backup, you might be wanting to run this guy, but I'm not 100% sure what you'll have to do. But just read ahead, and that way you'll know everything. Hopefully this was really, really useful and helpful, and you can figure this stuff out. I hope I didn't go through it too much, but or I hope I didn't confuse you anymore. But if you have any questions, let me know. I'd be happy to help. I hope you do really good on your test, and good luck. So take it easy, and I'll hear from you soon.